Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And yeah, this is it. The last episode for 2021. Bit of an odd spread we got here. Don't try looking for any sort of common through line beyond the very last of the Patreon request leftovers and the remains of my backlog. So yeah, with that, let's get on the pulse. So before we go any further, if you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. If you can't tell, my voice is kind of shot, might crack in the video. Can't exactly say what happened. You can all guess what happened. But we got 9 projects on the docket. Let's first start off with from Fox's Friends in the Corner.
Hey, no, you know how to turn it around. You sleep with lovers, sleep on sofas, sleep with others again.
Am I the only one who feels like Fox's kind of deserved a better run than what she got? She's got a great voice, a real knack for hooks, and even if I thought the writing could get kind of shaky, you could at least tell that she was willing to go for broke with some anthemic gusto that might have compensated for some instrumental ideas that can feel a little bit derivative within indie pop. But after an underrated album in 2016, she just seemed to slip out of the spotlight a little bit, getting dropped from RCA from the looks of things. But now she's got a new EP, and, well, it's frustrating because I do not think this is bad at all, but I also don't believe it moves the needle for Fox's in the slightest. Don't get me wrong, she's still a phenomenal singer with this huge expressive range that can really sell a big hook. And even if the mixing and mastering can be a really bit spotty across this project, why is Hollywood weirdly quiet in comparison with the rest of the EP? It's bizarre, but there are some solid piano-driven melodies that could anchor a pretty decent pop project. But man, like that Amy Shark album from earlier this year, it just feels dated to a very specific percussion-heavy millennial pop sound between, what do you know, 2014 and 2016, where Fox's vocal personality just doesn't add to more of the good but not unique production to put it over the top. And that's not counting the moments where she's really trying to play to a Dua Lipa mold on songs like Love Not Loving You and Dance. And it's a similar case when we get to the writing, if I'm being honest, where I will appreciate an arc that comes with bottoming out and then regaining one's self-confidence after getting very disillusioned with the whole music industry. But I'm also being honest, it's not quite unique enough to differentiate it from plenty of projects that play in similar territory. So, late 5 out of 10. I hope that album next year actually drops and sticks out a little more, because while this is good, I think she needs a little bit more out of her corner than, this. Next up from Spectral Wound, A Diabolic Thirst. Yeah, this has been on my personal backlog for way too long. A Canadian black metal act that plays a lot closer to the genre's classic roots, that's just jagged and raw enough to pick up all the texture, but not to the point where it compromises the melodies or sounds like a complete disaster. Now, they saw their breakout in 2018 with Infernal Decadence, which kicked a decent amount of ass. So now onto this project, well, it sure as hell is some ferocious and raw black metal, alright. This is one of those projects where you just know that Spectral Wound, they are not reinventing the wheel by any means. The melodic tremolo riffs, they will seethe and roar, the drum work's absolutely wild, the scream vocals are visceral, the solos are actually pretty impressive as all hell, and yet unfortunately the bass lines and grooves don't quite have the punch they really need to put these over the top. But the album is still so rock solid in its singular focus and cutting intensity that it's kind of hard to care. Now, I do wish there were more coherent dynamics to help differentiate these 6 songs from each other, which is why I actually really like the acoustic break on Frigid and Spellbound, or let's say the surprisingly bouncy grooves that show up on soul-destroying Black Debauchery, or hell, just any sort of hook in a pinch, maybe just help the lead work jump out a little bit more effectively. That could have been cool. And you know, I'm also not going to say the lyrics really grab me much here either. A streak of a lot of masochistic decadence that really doubles as the inevitable highway straight into some sort of darkness, albeit not hell. Instead of mourning some sort of great degeneration, why not accelerate it? Especially if we can all see it coming. And again, not really embracing the whole Satanism side here either. Lucifer is outright mocked as a devil of a different time, where one sordid individual really cannot encompass the evils that have entrenched themselves within modern organized religion, or hell, just even life in general in the modern age. But overall, while I like a lot of the poetry here, I kind of struggle to see what puts this above and beyond when it comes to this streak of black metal, especially when it is as indebted to the classic sound as it is. Definitely good. It's netting a solid 7 out of 10 for me, but unless you're head over heels for this particular sound, it's more consistently solid than great. Next up from Orla Gartland, Woman on the Internet.
Told me to be well and try to love myself. That maybe I won't wish that I was someone else. Tell me how to be more like you.
This has been circling the edges of my radar for a little bit, mostly off of snippets I caught on Bandcamp and the videos of some music critic colleagues. And since women have really been running the table when it came to guitar-driven indie rock in 2021 for me, just even outside the stuff I like, the critical acclaim has been racking up. It's not just me noticing it. I really wanted to give this Irish debut album a proper shot, and why does it remind me a little bit too much of a quirkier indie pop rock project that might have slipped out between 2008 and 2014? Well, okay, that's not quite apt. The jittery programmed percussion and lilting vocals, they seem to be splitting the difference between Imogen Heap, Feist, and Sarah Bareilles definitely occupying one chipper corner of indie pop, but Gartland is also pairing it with some jagged, burlier riffs and grooves that are just smooth enough to fit within these mixes, but also give these songs a muscle that actually has a little bit more punch behind them. It shouldn't be any surprise that she's actually gotten compared to Haim for better and for worse. And it's kind of interesting having some of those older 2000s reference points, because at least for me, it allows Gartland to come across as a little bit older in a lot of her framing of these songs. Certainly feels more millennial in its tangled but earnest sentiments of trying to pull her life together and then just bowl through a lot of her problems right now. Be they emotionally stymied guys, frustrated friendships, exes that are showing up at precisely the wrong time, or just getting out of her own goddamn head. And all of it is set up to make for a really goddamn solid debut record. But why isn't it hitting greatness? Well, I suspect it might be because Gartland seems to be hitting the middle ground, in between hitting some deeper lyrical depth and then just plowing into reckless explosiveness at full speed. It's a little bit too smooth and tasteful to erupt with full crushing explosive force, even if she does really have the guitar textures to do it. But you also might find yourself a little bit underwhelmed by some of the writing, which paints in broad strokes, not quite cutting as deeply when the personal details don't quite coalesce as strongly, or you don't get that little added bit of nuance or complexity to make the songs a bit more interesting. Don't get me wrong, this is a debut with some promise, and a few legit good to great songs, but after repeated listens, it just feels kind of in the shadow of its influences and doesn't quite pay off all the potential. Solid 6 out of 10 though, and if you're in the mood for this sort of material that leans more towards adult alternative or an older brand of it, give it a listen. You'll probably enjoy it. Next up, the self-titled album from Crimson Dimension. Alright, last of the Patreon requests, the debut album of a progressive raw black metal band out of Finland, with just 4 tracks to cycle through but running nearly an hour. Well, it sure as hell sounds a lot cleaner, with the synthetic arranged elements building up a lot of swell behind the much sharper, much more prominent lead guitar, and the frequent, very progressive drum breakdowns, even if, again, for some bizarre reason, it can't muster a consistent, compelling groove to save its life. And one of those slappy kick drums, it sounds distractingly flat in comparison with the rest of the kit. It's bizarre and kept pulling me out. But you can definitely tell this is a project that wants to lean way harder on the prog side of a lot of the compositions, in terms of its melodic switch-ups with a lot of the liquid, Opeth-leaning passages, and some of those twinkling pianos. So why do I get the uneasy feeling that this feels way less memorable than it really should be? I mean, there are melodic ideas here on the 4 tracks that all run long, but without much in the way of intricate interesting production to do more with them, some texture, or any sort of coherent transitions. Especially on Black Mass, it feels bizarrely clunky. It just feels like it's playing to more of a theatrical interpretation of black metal, rather than something that has a little bit more grisly punch to it. Granted, a lot of that has to do with the vocals and the content. The former sound like they're trying to force the difference between a growl and a shriek, and they're coming up really goddamn short of both. Yes, this is me saying it with how bad my throat sounds shredded. And then there's the writing. And while there's a part of me that wants to be charitable of English as their second language, the poetry feels almost embarrassingly basic in its nihilistic Satanism that doesn't bring anything new or remotely transgressive to the table. Honestly, the best words to describe this project might be amateurish or kind of shallow. I mean, it's got some technically sound riffing, and the drum work is indeed good, but none of the 4 songs here have enough of the focus, flow, or standout moments to really justify their length. Now, from a compositional standpoint, gotta be real, they feel more like grab bags of ideas not structured well enough to really add more. Hate to say it, but this is mediocre. 5 out of 10. You likely missed this year. You didn't miss much. Next up from Caro, Heartbeats, Heartbreaks.
Look at your eyes and I'm on my knees.
I feel like I've had such an up and down relationship with hyperpop the past couple of years. I really wanted to find something in 2021 that jumped out at me a little bit more. Something with some sparkle to really stick for me. So, okay, why not go to Bandcamp for the debut album from the singer from Planet 1999. The first act that actually got signed by PC Music, and were most known for tones that lean a little bit more on shoegaze and even krautrock. Now, if you read the liner notes, you might also recognize Caro here for co-writing and production on Charlie XCX's self-titled album, but now she's on her own here with a project that she entirely wrote and produced herself. You know, I'll be damned if I didn't enjoy this a decent bit. What's interesting is that Caro's whole approach to a lot of this blissed out hyperpop, which is complete with a lot of the thick cushion of autotune around her voice, an omnipresent metallic sheen of the synths when they don't sound like they pull from the cast-offs of Vaporwave, percussion that sounds a half step removed from a lot of clanking, trap-inflected pop, but it generally eschews the more blown-out, in-your-face approach to the genre for something that is actually way closer to modern dream pop, with a few passing glances at Purity Ring and even Porter Robinson along the way. And as such, it sprawls across the haze and the distance here, where Caro's sweet vocals are a solid focal point to pull you in across the flurry of sampled snippets and swells of synth, but intentionally always seems a step away, and that distance becomes a palpable factor in both the compositions and really a lot of the content. So much of this album on the surface seems like it's playing to a lot of pop cliches, but when you dig a little deeper, it's more about trying to cross what seems like a vast gulf in between our dreams and reality, while preserving the idea of who we are. And I like how well the album plays with ambience and space to accentuate how isolating that can really feel, or just how fruitless it can all really feel. Honestly, might work even a little bit too well, because despite some impressive vibes and consistently well-likable production, the pacing can feel a little bit sluggish, especially as Caro will pepper in a lot of ambient instrumentals in between songs across the project, and many of these tracks can feel a little bit drawn out, or at the very least feel a little bit lacking in a sense of climax or any sense of firepower. Now, part of that is intentional because of the mid-tempo, soft-focus, vibe-heavy presentation, but without a lot of immediacy, this is a project that requires that you come to it rather than meeting you halfway. And yet, it somehow managed to hook me. Probably closer to dream pop than hyperpop proper, but the gentle yearning haze really coalesced in a way that for a lot of her peers, it hasn't for me. So solid 7 out of 10. This is really quite good. Give it a shot. Next up from Solemn Brigham, South Center Street.
Language, keep the dust off your apron. Spill some, watch how they lane switch. Keep the hope alive. Keep the hope alive. Keep the hope alive. Keep the hope alive.
No, I did not forget about this one. No, after Solemn Brigham surprised me twice over with his Marlowe projects with L'Orange, I definitely did not want to let him slip by me with this solo project, especially as he was growing considerably as a lyricist along the way, and I was curious. And as such, well, to some extent it feels a lot like Solemn Brigham is locking into many of the same grooves and vibes that he had on the Marlowe albums, and he's such an amazingly elastic, melodic, and naturally charismatic rapper that it's very easy to get pulled into a lot of his vibe. But this time, however, there's a lot less of a conceptual structure brought from the samples and instrumentation that L'Orange provides. Incidentally, while the production palette is still very much shaggy and textured in that boom bap fashion, it's way less consistent this time around, and we're going to get to that. But it also places a lot more focus on Solemn Brigham talking about his own come up and his struggle to both give back and help his hardscrabble hometown, but also then survive while doing his things a lot of his own way, especially when a lot of the shortfalls can feel, well, increasingly apparent. He said this is not a rags to riches album, and I absolutely believe it, as he seems to struggle to just run in place while a lot of his world decays around him. But it also highlights two issues, one persisting from the Marlowe projects, and one that's pretty new, with the first being that for as much as Solemn Brigham is a great goddamn rapper in terms of flows and melodic construction that lets him pull together hooks pretty consistently, I've really been waiting for him to take a slightly deeper step with his content, bring in a little bit more detail to his storytelling, or for all of his very well-structured bars to add at least some sharper, more memorable punchlines. Kind of the opposite problem with Bruiser Wolf, come to think of it, but in both cases, I'm left thinking that for as many flows are being dropped here, it should stick more with me. Although with a more personal, somewhat downbeat ending, he also came really goddamn close to sticking the landing. Now granted, you also do need to consider the production here, where minus L'Orange, all for but one song, a lot of the boom bap beats are just not as gritty or colorful or carry the same sort of flavor or groove. They're generally okay, minus a few poor synth choices like on My Way and Future Brother, but for a rapper who's as vibrant as Solemn Brigham, I'll repeat what I said with Marlowe, in that you want production that can actually match and amplify his character, not drag him back, even if that might also be the underlying point of this project. Don't get me wrong, I do think this is pretty damn good, but it hasn't quite stuck with me as much as I was hoping for, or for the L'Orange projects, and I do think a change-up might be needed here. So very light 7 out of 10, I feel like that's generous, but if you like this brand of hip-hop, you'll probably still have fun with it. Next up, from Ethereal Shroud, Trisagion. Okay, one last black metal swing before the end of the year, and this one-man black metal project from the UK has been racking up the critical acclaim within circles that actually know, so even if I'm not exactly a huge fan of the doom-inspired fringe of the subgenre, I did go back to check out that remaster of his 2015 album, and, well, the closest to doom elements might be the extended track lengths. For the most part, it plays to the roughest sides of symphonic black metal, and it's actually surprisingly pretty damn credible as a result. Even if the lo-fi mixing has some hiccups, and it's hard not to feel like the songs eclipsing the 20-minute mark could be tightened up a bit. But okay, we only got 3 songs in that vein this time around, but I'll be damned if I did not find myself really liking this again. Now, all this comes with a massive asterisk that all these pieces could be trimmed and tightened up. If you're more into doom or drone, I can imagine the length here will not bother you, but I gotta say it's probably not a good sign that if you think songs have reached natural conclusions and then they go on for another 7 minutes, even if you can tell that each song has melodic compositions that are distinctive movements in mind. That being said, sink into the tremendous swells of explosive blast beats, rumbling grooves, tremolo leads that know exactly when to bring in some sizzling texture to roar across the murk, and frontman Joseph Hawker has exactly the right guttural howl that works across a mix like this, especially being precisely placed within the roars to be audible, but still caught up within the cacophony. And that works really well when it comes to a lot of the writing here too, which I gotta highlight is a real standout for me. Trisagion was inspired by Hawker's disillusionment and contempt for the larger world that is clinging to a lot of short-term consumerism, regressive and corrupted religious strictures, and even looking backwards towards fascism and going in that direction. But what's powerful about this album is that Hawker knows how to ground this sense of cynicism with a real emotional conflict. Because he doesn't want to feel hatred or cynicism towards any of this. He doesn't want to hate his fellow man, which whom he knows he needs them to survive. So the emotional conflict is rooted in this dogged and forged sense of righteous optimism that we can be better against, well, the reality of everything else is crashing down around him and us. And god damn it if I can't get behind the conflict here, especially by the end where he knows just how easy it would be just to succumb to numb depression and burnout. But he has found his center, and you know he's gonna weather this maelstrom all the way. And again, in between some of the terrific melodic groove passages, the striking integration of some keyboards and especially the viola, just how well the transitions are managed for a project that could have easily fallen into this trap of just sounding bloated or just fallen into the background altogether. This was the sort of black metal I was thrilled to find before the end of 2021. 8 out of 10. Absolutely deserves some consideration. Next up from Dessa, Ides.
Live that Roman code. It used to be, if you don't like it, you could leave. But then the walls came down, and so it's all ruined now.
I know a whole lot of you might think I'd be all over this. An artist who's made some of my favorite albums of the 2010s, dropping an EP at the end of the year. Surely this would be the project that would be guaranteed to slip on my best list at the last possible second. Right? Well, I'll admit I had some serious doubts with this one, mostly because it's more of a compilation of songs that Dessa's been drip feeding across the entire year. A release strategy I haven't really kept up with because I really don't like it as a release strategy. The entire project had effectively been released by mid-November. Hang any sort of coherent through line or theme across the project. Well, okay, maybe that's not entirely fair. Dessa's still impressively good at sketching out a lot of dense, noir-inflected stories, where she's then gonna play the hard-drinking, hard-living woman who's scratching out successes on the road head over fist, and the challenge really is for everyone around this person to keep up. But since it is Dessa, she's gonna keep such a wide angle to the scene to see everyone impacted or then caught in that orbit. From the crime kingpin family robbed by the nanny, to watching a guy spend way too much for a gold digger who is sucking him dry out of boredom, before then focusing on the woman them's playing that femme fatale character, to then highlight a capitalist system where, you know, even some of the trappings of pop feminism in the modern age exacerbate a system that everyone becomes accustomed to surviving. Everyone picks up a little bit. But even then, the most prevalent feeling across this is that it's fragmented, both in the content and the stylism, which even then she will acknowledge by the final track, throwing so much at the wall and blowing it all apart to feel something real when you might be a little more adrift, which could be read as a criticism of Chime as well, but I'm sorry, Ides doesn't have anything close to that project's best hooks, and it's in the execution where I think Dessa kind of stumbles here. Don't get me wrong, she's still a great rapper, but I also know she's been playing with pop as of recently, and the chirpier auto-tune and presentation of a cut like I Already Like You does not play to her strengths, and minus even more of the organic texture, a lot of Laserbeak's fragile synth mixes backing up the track progressions, they can't exactly carry the muscle or flair that could give some undercooked compositions here just a little bit more staying power. A lot of these sound like first drafts that were hammered out really fast. Yeah, the strings on Talking Business and LYTP off the Gleaming Keys, they're nice touches, as are the rougher clatter of the sampled drums on Rome, and I like the spare groove behind Life on Land, but it really just feels like a sampler for diehard fans who are hoping that she would put out something, given the whole mess of the past couple of years that we're not going to get into. And while it's a light 7 out of 10, it's not great, and I am disappointed. I think I'll just wait for the next album. But while we're on the topic of disappointments, from Roddy Ricch, Live Life Fast.
Since I was a little nigga, I just about to go give me some money. Since I made up 25 million on one of them days, now these niggas biting my way. I got fatigue on my body, on right Maserati, it's right, I'm going out of space.
Maybe this was my fault. Maybe I was just expecting way too much. I was mixed on Roddy Ricch when he saw a little bit of album success in late 2019, but that translated to his commercial breakthrough in the next year with a couple songs that would really grow on me by leaps and bounds, which led me remembering that debut a lot more fondly, and it's got great moments. And he was showing off a lot of versatility and flair on his guest verses in the past year, to say nothing of taking some time with the sophomore project, all of which stood to imply that Roddy Ricch might be really cooking up something special, even if Late at Night as a lead-off single was, I gotta say, the definition of underwhelming, which might as well be the goddamn tagline of this album. Cause wow, this is a letdown. First off, for all the talk of Roddy Ricch taking his time to put together a masterpiece, outside of the arranged elements occasionally sounding a bit more expensive, this feels like shockingly bog standard when it comes to mainstream trap. Occasionally we get some decent acoustic cycling progressions, or maybe a bit of a West Coast synth bounce, or you know that nifty intro on Move to Miami, to say nothing of the drill flourishes that I say would feel out of place if it's not for being some of the most interesting and propulsive songs on the entire project, like Murder One with 5 Foreign, but there is a distressing lack of urgency or flair here. Very little in the way of hooks that might stand out in comparison with his debut, or on compositions that often feel like they're missing that little bit of spark. Maybe that's why Roddy Ricch cedes so much ground to his guest stars, with decidedly mixed results. Yeah, 21 Savage is, of course, he's gonna sound fine, but why are Gunna, Future, and especially Kodak Black even here if they're gonna drop verses with no interesting flair? But I'm increasingly realizing the bigger problem on this album, it might be Roddy Ricch himself. In comparison with his debut, he is a lot less melodic, resulting to a lot of trap flows that at best feel intriguingly off-kilter, and at worst can feel outright incompetent, lacking the tune to give them more of a foundation and make him sound more interesting. And here's the thing, without that added tunefulness and catchiness, you can't tell me that Roddy Ricch's come-up flexing is all that distinct or interesting, especially given how often he's cribbing from Young Thug, or slips towards a lot of very obvious name-dropping. That Lakers reference on All Good, it's gonna date this record so badly, especially when that team implodes, as it already seems like they're doing. And while some of his paranoia is still here, even it's kind of relaxed in favor of a lot of mid-tempo sex jam hookup vibes that play a lot closer to Late at Night or a bunch of luxury porn. And even then, with less actual tune behind him, I'm not even sure that the sensuality is being delivered convincingly. There's an interlude with Jamie Foxx and Alex Isley midway through, where you get the impression that Roddy Ricch might deliver something with a little bit more opulent stylism, slow it all down, but it doesn't really materialize. And unfortunately, it winds up feeling like the sort of sophomore slump that comes with all the best ideas rammed onto the debut album, leaving the follow-up to play to trends, instead of the potential that Roddy Ricch had to shape trends. So yeah, real disappointment to end out 2021. 5 out of 10. I'd say take or leave it, but given the public's been lukewarm at best to this, I think we got our answer. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, my voice sounds like shit. I apologize for it. I'm still trying to recover from this goddamn pandemic. It's really screws up with you. Yeah, it wasn't fun over the holidays, you can imagine. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to help support the channel, got my link to my merch down there below. I also got my link to my Patreon right over there. Hell, you can argue with me on my Discord. And when my schedule opens up in the new year, you can get albums listed over there, or help just support the channel. Till then, until next year, I'm Mark, you're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.